I'm glad to open the second day of our conference, Political and Economic Self-Constitution, Migration, Inequalities, and Discrimination. I'm especially glad that scientific meeting, Political and Economic Self-Constitution, which was founded in 2013 in Ukraine as a seminar, developed into a global conference. This interdisciplinary conference is becoming more and more intercultural and transcontinental. On the second edition of Political and Economic Self-Constitution Conference, we have presentations from 15 countries, which are Greece, Ukraine, Switzerland, Brazil, Poland, Czech Republic, Lithuania, Italy, Great Britain, Moldova, Indonesia, Turkey, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Mexico, hopefully today, and yesterday we had presentation from Nigeria. Such global geographical coverage of the conference gives opportunity to its participants to compare scientific approaches from different parts of the world to deepen understanding of migration-related topics in conditions of crisis. I would like to invite Didier Ruedin and Cecilia on the Move project leader to open the second day of the conference with his presentation, Discrimination Driven by Variation in Social and Economic Conservatism, Evidence from a Nationwide Field Experiment. I have just made you co-host. So you should be able to share your screen.
Yes. There should be. That my slides or none? No. Sorry. This one then. Oh gosh, have you got my slides? You haven't got everything, right? No.
We see your slides. We see a beautiful young lady.
Yeah, but also the thing around, right? Let's.
Yes.
Too many screens options.
Maybe you can open presentation on your computer and then share.
Yeah, and that's what it's supposed to do. Presenting. Sorry about that.
We already had everything that yesterday.
Okay. You got my big lady here. Can you see my Barbara here? Or
yes, we see presentation.
okay, so interrupt me if it doesn't work. But so meet Barbara. This is a young woman, and she's just got a new job and is looking for a new place to live, closer to her new workplace. And would you be shocked to learn that depending on her name, her chances of getting that place varies? We call that discrimination. Would you be surprised to learn that depending on where in the country she's looking for a place, Barbara's chances vary? Barbara, by the way, she's not a real person. She's generated. So just to get that out of the way. So I'm Didier Ruedin. I'm based at the University of Neuchâtel in Switzerland. And I'm going to present you work on discrimination, how it's driven by social and economic conservatism. This is work jointly by Julie Lacroix and Egbosiuba, just to get that out of the way. And I've been asked to talk about ethics as well, so I'll sprinkle a bit of ethics here and there across the presentation. Right, so I started making these big claims about discrimination already. How do we even know that there is discrimination? A common mistake, I think, in the literature on migration is that we observe inequalities and then we kind of conclude inequality, well, that's unfair, right? So that must be discrimination. The point today is that we can do better. And the best we can do so far is doing an experiment. What we do is we simulate people like Barbara you've just met before, and we apply for real apartments, observe what happens. So we simulate these people because we can control who they exactly are. We can control, so we are in control and we can draw very clean conclusions. Let me explain how this works. So we go to a website. In our case, we went to the biggest website in Switzerland where properties are listed. And we have a protocol to find specific kind of apartments. And then we generate these two people. There's always two people we generate. And I think that's okay. So we randomly create two people. And now, because the first contact is by email, or as you can see on the screen in the middle, by contact form, we don't need these pictures, okay? So these pictures are just to illustrate the profiles that we create. And for legal reasons, we couldn't use these generated pictures anyway. So there was two people, two Barbaras, if you want. One is of the majority population, and the other one is a member of a minority, ethnic minority population. Now, in this experiment, this is important. I put the picture on the screen to illustrate what's going on, but in the real experiment, we have to name to signal ethnicity. So because we want realistic conversations, it's by email, we can't have pictures in there. So it's just the name to signal the ethnicity. Now, though both of them, or both of these fake people apply for the real job, and we have very diligent assistants who helped us with doing that. And between 2 and 12 hours, we apply these two people to these two profiles, fake profiles, generated people, applied for this real job advertising, this housing that is, and ask for a viewing. Can we view this apartment? Of course, in view of renting it later on. And what we do is then we look at the reactions, like, is it that both of them get invited for the viewing, or is it that one of them gets invited and the other one does not? And because everything is controlled in this situation, we have generated these people, we have generated the profiles, we have generated the information that we give. If there is a difference, we can conclude it's just due to the name or their ethnicity. But it is about 7,500 times between March and October 2018. So it's in Switzerland, and we covered the entire country. So it was a big thing. I come back to why we do that. And this is how it looks like. So this is kind of message, one of the messages that we sent. And you can see in blue and in red or purple, we have different strings. These are the names that generated. So it's not always the same name. It's not always Barbara, but we have a list of names that we've sampled randomly. This sounds maybe complicated, maybe this looks complicated, but we need that to make sure it's not something about the sound of Barbara maybe, but it's about the signal of the ethnicity that's really that we capture. It's not that one name, but it's something of this group of names that makes a difference. Right, so many names, and what we capture is really, on average, this group of names from ethnic minority groups, names, they have a different reaction. We also have a large N, we have a lot of number of applications that we sent, and that's important because we can then draw solid statistical conclusions. And as you can see on the screen here, we have different strings, like my name, my age, my job. We can also draw inferences about different aspects, different characteristics of these fictitious applicants. Okay, so this is the main result, if you want. In the middle, you have like this 0 line, which is dashed line. That's the 74% invitation rate of if you apply with a Swiss majority name. So it's a majority population, and 74% get invited for viewing and 26 don't get invited. That's kind of the baseline against which we compare. On the left in orange, we have names from neighboring countries. So that's in Germany, France, and Italy. And we have even a slight advantage for them, which we don't really understand why. But what's important for us when we talk about discrimination is on the right here. We have in blue people with a name from Kosovo, and in green people with a name from Turkey. These are the two biggest non-Western European immigrant populations in Switzerland. And you can see how the bars are below the 0 line. That's the discrimination. That's, yeah, and we call that racial discrimination normally. And you can also see there was 2 bars. One is like the permanent residence, and that is means people are naturalized. So they say in their message, hey, I have a permanent residence, or they say, I have a Swiss passport. So my name shows I'm from Kosovo, of course, but I show that I have a naturalized. And you can see how it doesn't make a big difference. So it's not that the discrimination is because of the passport, but it's really the name that drives these results. So for Turkey, even get lower invitation rates if they say they have become Swiss citizens. So that's the baseline, right? So ethics, my first time. Well, you've guessed it, of course. Maybe I sold the method very well. I mean, it's great for discovering discrimination, but it does pose serious ethical questions. And the first one, I put that on screen, it's hidden research, right? We're not transparent. We don't tell the participants, if you want, what's going on. So that goes against many principles of transparent, open, ethical research, but it can be justified. And there are two main justifications I want to talk about here. One is that we can't really capture discrimination otherwise. Remember I said at the beginning, if you just observe inequalities, it's not convincing. If you go with a survey question, we have a lot of social desirability. We don't think the participants will admit if they discriminate against others. And we all think a lot of times we don't even realize when we discriminate against others. So it's difficult. You can't just ask, do you discriminate? Because might not realize it. And the second justification is that there is a benefit for the minorities and for society more globally. So yes, is it all good? We have two justifications. Well, not at all. It goes more than that. And that's something you need to think about if you do that kind of research. We're wasting the time of hundreds and thousands of proprietors and agencies. So each time they check our profile and decide, do we want to invite that person or not? So maybe it's not a lot of time for each person or each agency, but if you do the sums, it's a lot of time that we wasted in the housing market. And the one thing that I've not seen that much discussed in these field experiments is that we do apply for real apartments, real advertised apartments, and it's very convincing this way, but it was also we intervene in the real market. So there might be people who are not invited, real people who are not invited, because our fake person, our generated person was invited. And that is something that is not just right. Now, some solutions, of course. First of all, I think whenever there's ethical questions in research, and there are a lot of them in research and migration, we take them seriously. We don't just brush it away and say, hey, we want to do that. It's cool, we can do it. But we take it seriously, spend a lot of time in the team to discuss it. We try to find solutions. And we have also an ethics commission at the university, which we consult and discuss the matter and find what's the best way we can do. One thing which was a bit reassuring here, compared other people do the same kind of field experiments in the job market, in the employment market, and that you have to kind of fake diplomas, which legally speaking is a different beast. So here we just create fake names. That's not legally very problematic, but it can be in field experiment. One thing I think that's when we discussed this experiment at the beginning, we collected a lot of responses. We wanted to make it big because we want to draw solid conclusions. It's not like, let's do a little experiment because you don't want to waste people's time. We want to be big, so we have results that are solid and yeah. So maybe do it better, but not so often. Yes. Then we had discussions on debriefing. In this case, we didn't debrief, but maybe if we did again, we would debrief. That's something really depends a bit on the market. One thing in there, which is very complicated for us about debriefing, is really that on the one hand, we have responsibilities towards the involuntary participants, the proprietors, the agencies. On the other hand, if we get all the agencies on the edge and they're aware that people are doing these field experiments, maybe people after us can't do the same experiments because we kind of influence the market and how people react. And so we also have responsibilities to other researchers. So it is complicated and it takes a lot of discussion, and that's necessary. So if you ever do field experiments, don't take any shortcuts because you're going to regret it, I think. Right. Now, what I really want to talk about is this variation in the context in conservatism. That was in the title, and that's what we did. Okay. So we wanted to understand how is discrimination related to conservatism. And the first thing is what we did, we learned that there are different kinds of conservatism. We didn't know that when we started, really. There's social conservatism that's linked to traditionalism, conformity, authoritarianism. And if you're into Galtan, it's less of the green alternative libertarian values. Okay. On the other hand, we have the economic conservatism. That's people who complain about undue government involvement. They think, well, it's private enterprise. I decide, I do what I want to. I'm against redistribution, and it's all about individual freedom. So we have these two different kinds of conservatism that we look at. And these distinctions help us to vary. We go beyond urban and rural. We have variation in the different places where we did the field experiment. Now we did that in Switzerland, so we have all these referendums. There are a lot of referendums on issue votes, and we can use that to identify areas, municipalities where people tend to be more socially conservative or less conservative, socially conservative. They can be more economically conservative or more less. So for each municipality, we have a score on social and economic conservatism. And you see that on this graph here. So you have on the x-axis, you have economic conservatism. So you have this, each kind of area, you have the municipalities. And then on the y-axis, you have the social conservatism. So the different municipalities vary in the social and economic conservatism. And now if you look at the colors, red, these are the clusters, municipalities, where there is discrimination, where we find this discrimination, where Barbara wasn't invited if she had a minority name, well, if she was a minority, and right. And in blue, we might even have a positive advantage, and gray is kind of where we can't determine. Now, if you look at a graph very carefully, or not so carefully, you might notice all the reds are on the right-hand side. This is where municipalities are economically conservative. And you also might notice that irrespective of the position on the y-axis, so the social conservatism, it's all red is on the right. So it's about economic conservatism and not about social conservatism, that where we find different levels of discrimination. So we find this, yes, depending on where you apply for your viewing for housing, it really makes a difference. And it's not just conservatism, there is something about economic conservatism. We're not completely done yet with ethics, because ethics sprinkled in. Now we have one more challenge. We have these results, we have to communicate that. And there's a big tension here. Everyday language does not differentiate between different kinds of conservatism. This is something we do as academics. We can differentiate these different concepts, we can measure it. But we also have to make sure that we get this understood when we communicate to people who haven't studied conservatism. The second challenge in communication for the results is we're in the world of probabilities. So it's not like in this municipality, everyone gets discriminated, in this one, nobody does get discriminated. It's a probabilities. With this name, you're less likely to be invited. It's not black and white. It's more likely, less likely. And that's difficult to communicate to broader public. And the last challenge that we identified here is we're in the world of aggregated research here. So we'd have these individual profiles, but all the conclusions are aggregated. We look at municipality levels. So it's in economically conservative contexts and not necessarily economic conservative individuals. So that's a difference, which is also difficult to communicate. So here we're talking about ethics of publishing, ethics of communicating the results. And of course, we don't have a control of how the results are perceived and used. But I think as researchers, we also have these responsibilities. We don't want to directly serve the extremes, political extremes. We have to try to make it communicate in a way that it's interpreted, a way that's easily, properly interpreted. There is, of course, a limit. We're not responsible for everything that's being done and said about it, but I think we really have to try and communicate in a way that prevents misunderstanding. Okay, so to conclude my presentation, I'm going to come back to Barbara. So I think I've shown you that depending on her name, or if it was Barbara, this person or not, her chances of viewing an apartment, let alone getting an apartment, vary. So it has implications on her life. Maybe she gets a nice apartment, or maybe somewhere she's not so happy. We also seen that part of the story depends on where. Because Barbara got her job, where she wants to live. Is it in an economically conservative area? It's much harder with a foreign name than if you're in a non-conservative or a socially conservative area. So we could make in this study, we could make progress in understanding regional differences, kind of how it kind of place influences how we behave. And we think it's about the environment legitimizing certain behavior. So it's okay, people think it's okay to discriminate or make a distinction, and in other places it's not so. But I'm going to stop here in case there are any questions or anything else. Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. Could you stop sharing the screen?
Yes, yeah, of course. Stop.
And I invite questions, but first, before starting questions, could you give me back rights of host? I think that instead of making you co-host, I made you a host, and now I lost rights of host.
Oh, okay. But why do I do that?
There are 3 dots.
Okay, the more, yes.
Make host. Make me host.
Okay, maybe let's go to the participants. Sorry.
On the video, where you can see me,
click on
but
the video.
it is Tzagkarakis.
There you go. Yes, you're the host.
I'm host.
Yes.
Thank you again, and I can invite people. Yeah. So, could you please ask questions to Didier?
Yeah, I could start if there's not a problem.
You're welcome.
Good morning. First of all, thank you, Didier, for your presentation. I think it was very interesting. It was nice to see the use of the artificial intelligence on our research in a very original way. I think you had a great idea how to observe a phenomena that would be very hard, if not through such a tool, like with a real person. It will be maybe even harder and raise even further ethical problems. So I think you did a great relation between the technologies and the new technologies aspects, as well as with the ethical aspect. I was mostly curious about, and when the interviews were accepted, how did you proceed with that? You deny them? You say, oh, we found another place? How did you manage to, shut down the opportunity that was opened up with the acceptance of the interview?
So first thing, just to clarify this, we did not use these pictures, only used them for the presentations, because this particular source we cannot use. But I think it's, you're right, it opens, the AI-generated pictures opens kind of an avenue to do this if you wanted to use pictures. But the communication is always over email or with the form, so there's no picture there, but yes. So it depends on the next. So when we get invited, we didn't do anything, and we did not do anything because we had consulted with agencies and proprietors before, and we found that in this particular market, at that particular moment in time, there was a lot of invitations going around and people just don't bother to respond, just like proprietors don't respond either. So that's normal. So we stay quiet, and they figured out, okay, they're not coming. If they then ask, hey, I invited you, are you coming? Then we say, oh, sorry, I found something else. So we declined because we didn't want to waste more time. It's already wasted time. But I think this is really something that we had to do with research on the market in that moment in time, in that specific market. In other markets, it's apparently common that you get invited or you have to confirm. Then you decline more quickly because you want to minimize the impact, of course, on people. But yeah, I think this is also part of ethics. Like, you have to know your market and understand. You can't just take a template and run with it. It's adjusting and understanding what you're doing. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. And sorry, I misunderstood you. I thought you had used the pictures like in the top maybe of the profile, but because there were such interesting images, I thought they were part of the study. So sorry for my misunderstanding. But anyways, it was interesting to think about the possibilities of IA in such a kind of a research. So thank you very much. It was very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this particular website I used is called This Person Does Not Exist. And it explicitly gives you not the right to pretend this to be a real person. So I think I've been transparent. These are not real persons, but if you don't use that in an experiment, we pretend they're real, and they don't allow that. But I guess other AI would not be that restrictive. So.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? We have question from Maxim Filatov, who is here. And I asked participants to come closer to microphone so that
that's not more like a question, more like a comment. I can tell about my own experience in Switzerland. And I mean, yeah, people sometimes could be conservative and kind of discriminating while arriving in the country in 2022 and try to find an apartment in Canton Vaud. So and it's not easy process and it takes time. So I applied to different agencies and I just like look online for advertisement. So among 36 options which I had, 20 agencies responded to me emailing that they don't work with Ukrainian citizens. Like immediate response, like 1 or 2 days. Even though that I mentioned that I'm not requesting any like social help, I said that I'm gonna pay myself, everything, attach all the documents, but response was no immediate. The 20 agencies. Other 10 options, I went and sold the apartment, but later I got emails that the apartment was already put into reserve, as far as I understand, by local person. So only option number 36 worked, and the owner of the apartment was the Chinese lady, whose background was kind of connected to Ukraine because she grew up in a family of Chinese diplomats who lived in Kiev and in Moscow. So anyway, just like real life example that, I mean, yes, discrimination is illegal, but it still kind of works and people tell you like directly, sorry, we don't want to be Ukrainians, even though if you have the permit, all the documents.
Thank you, Maxim, for sharing your experience. Would you like to somehow comment it, Didier?
No, just thank you for sharing this. I mean, there's unfortunately lots of stories, like individual stories, bring a light, bring alive what we're doing, and yeah. Yeah, I think maybe one thing just to clarify, discrimination is not illegal in Switzerland. Yeah, freedom of contract, and that's valid a lot. So the law does not protect you very well. So we don't have any private. Yeah, the law is very weak to protect against discrimination in these situations. So, yeah.
Yes, owners of apartments have right to choose, and they use this right, and it's up to social scientists to investigate this process, finding discrimination in it, and hopefully elaborating some procedures, maybe through mass media, to reduce the discrimination. But still, we don't have legal mechanisms to reduce this process. When discrimination is on the workplace, it can be somehow maybe legally legally affected, but not in case of renting apartments. And besides, I would also like to give a short comment that besides discrimination, which has a definite definition, there are also numerous structural constraints and administrative regulations which are not always somewhere announced in some laws, but still they work. And social scientists can do nothing about that, and that is the field of lawyers. Maybe social scientists should cooperate with lawyers more often than we used to do that. Thank you, Didier, for your presentation. It was very interesting to listen to you and to let our participants know that such cases can happen even in Switzerland. And our next presentation is investigating the intercultural journey of Nigerian refugees in Italy using social representations approach by Augusta. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce all your names. Could you introduce yourself properly?
It's no problem. Good morning. Yeah, you can actually call me Augusta. It's better. Thank you. So let me share my screen. Oh, I think you have to make me a host first or something.
Yes, I'm sorry, I need to give you
access
to make you co-host. You should be able to share your screen now.
All right. Okay, I hope you can see it.
Yes, we can see your presentation.
All right. Hello, good morning, everyone. So my name is Chukwudumebi Augusta Egbosiuba, and I'm a PhD student here in La Sapienza University of Rome, Italy. I'm currently in my second year. And my research is focused on investigating the intercultural journey of Nigerian refugees in Italy using social representative approach. And sorry. So my research, it is no news that Italy is a migration country, and there are a lot of Africans as well as Europeans trooping into the country. And in a small scale, Nigeria is actually one of these countries. And we actually started experiencing, in Italy, they started experiencing much inflow of Nigerian migrants in the year, starting from the year in the 1980s. So this was where there was like a huge number of Nigerian migrants, both refugees and people that came for study and other things as well. So my research is mainly focused on the experiences of Nigerian refugees in Italy, and this, narrowing it down, focusing on their challenges and mainly what they tend to experience, the negative part of being a Nigerian refugee in Italy. Of course, it is one thing to be a Nigerian migrant, and it's also another thing to be a Nigerian refugee. I think that is like a double negative kind of. Yeah, so my research is focused also on the social representation aspect of Nigerian refugees. How are they represented in Italy? And based on this representation, how have the Nigerian refugees positioned themselves based on the representations that they tend to experience? And so that is where positioning theory comes into play. I'm also going to, I also focus on the acculturation aspect. It is no news that education of any sort is of great positive impact in the society. So I'm going to be looking at education as an acculturation process for the Nigerian refugees. And this is narrowing it down to non-formal education, because in Italy, I think this is actually a European thing, and also in Italy as well. But Italy has a lot of educational opportunities for Nigerian, for migrants in general, and it comes in form of non-formal education, where they provide language learning, skills acquisition, and so on. So I think the famous one in Italy is the Caritas. We also have European Solidarity Corps, in which other NGOs are registered under them. So Nigerian refugees benefit a lot from this, and also from the reception camp, where at their initial arrival, where they are kept, they also have these activities lined up in order to help them assimilate into the society. So hence, another part of my research is also going to focus on not just their experiences, as well as how non-formal education help them to make this, help make their stay in Italy better. But also, we're going to also look at it in the lens of the key players. That is, the people that provide this non-formal education. Are they actually seeing a change? When these refugees come and when they have these experiences, do they have like testimonies, positive testimonies on the outcome? So we are also looking at it, not just at the lens of the Nigerian refugees, but also through the lens of the key players that provide this non-formal education as well. And moving forward, so the method that have been used in this initial part of the research has been episodic interview. This is actually really have been really interesting, because it really captured a lot of some deeply rooted things that I didn't get to write in my research, because I got to realize that there were a lot of underlying issues that Nigerian migrants, Nigerian refugees faced as well, in not just discrimination and other things, but there are also other things that they tend to experience that define their identities as well. That brings me to the part of how my interview was analyzed using the positioning grid of Slocum-Bradley. So this place, it's more of a manual analysis. So I looked at the storyline, the identities, the rights, and the duties as well. And yeah, so looking at the results, the study findings indicate that Nigerian refugees in Italy encounter obstacles and multi-faced experiences. This is, of course, this is obvious. It is obvious that Nigerian refugees will experience these obstacles. Like I said, it is one thing living in Italy as a migrant, also as a migrant with color, as a Black migrant. And also another thing, living as a refugee migrant, like I said, that is like a double minority. And so looking at two key participants, this is the initial interviews and the analysis, looking at two key participants and their experiences. The first participant experienced challenge upon arrival, such as language barrier, past trauma, and Sorry, I didn't get that. Okay. Sorry, someone interrupted, so I don't know if I need to do something. Okay, so the first participants actually experienced, had a lot of, okay. The first participants actually had a lot of challenges on arrival. This is the language barrier. Of course, Italian is not a famous language in Nigeria. So mainly in Nigeria, the language that is widely spoken is English. So due to this, coming to Italy as a refugee, Nigerian refugee, is going to definitely be a struggle, because in Italy, in order for you to blend in socially in the society, you need the language to be your key thing here. So yeah, so of course, this was a challenge, and also the past trauma. And when I mean past trauma, I'm not talking about maybe their experiences in Nigeria. I'm talking about their journey from Nigeria to Italy. Actually, this was, like I said, an underlying part that I didn't exactly expect during the research, but it was really highlighted by the participants. They spoke about how they came with the perspective that, okay, they are leaving Nigeria using a boat or a ship, or like they are through the sea, and they thought they were going to come all the way from Nigeria to Italy, but not knowing that you actually have to transit in Libya. You have to come from Nigeria to Libya, and from Libya, then you move to Italy. So a lot of them didn't actually know this. And so hence, there was a lot of things that they experienced. Like, for example, so some of them in Libya, they thought maybe, okay, at the latter stage, when they got to find out that, okay, we'll be transiting in Libya, they thought it was going to be something of like few days or something, maybe weeks tops. But they got there and they realized that there was another exploitation going on there. Some of them were arrested, and some of them were taken into sex slavery and so many other things. So it was quite a mess for them. And they had to, some of them spent months, even years, trying to save up and trying to get out of that situation and save up again so they can board another boat from Libya to Italy. And it is so funny because some of the stories are really, really overwhelming. One of them told me about how he was really young when he left. And he told me about how he didn't even know how to use like a compass, and they never had a compass when they were leaving from Libya to Italy. So they traveled like without a compass, and they told him that he had no idea where he was going. They told him to lead this boat. And he told me that it was a lifeboat. And you know, lifeboat is like something you could literally use a knife and just puncture on the rubber, and it's destroyed. You know, so these are the traumas. So they are bound to have traumas given things like this. So he told me how they were circling until they got to the shore of Italy. So this is the trauma I'm talking about that they experienced. Then discrimination, of course, they spoke about the fact that they experienced a lot of discrimination in the reception camp in regards to the fact that they were so focused on the economical aspect rather than actually helping them, and also discrimination that they experienced outside of Italy, because these participants actually, my research is narrowed to participants that have 5 years and above experience residing in Italy. So of course they have these 5 years, they would have gathered a lot of experiences, and these experiences would have as well defined their identities and also their storylines as well. So a lot of them battled, participant one told me about how he battled with depression and distress, the mental well-being was messed up and stuff like that. So it was not really, even when he arrived, it was like he was in a whole different space. So with participant two, he also shed light on layers of discrimination, like as well as it was more redundant because the other person actually shed the same light on discrimination. Like I said, it's not really easy being like a double negative in Italy as a migrant. And yeah, and also he also highlighted the fact that he experienced discrimination within the ethnic group. Yeah, Nigeria has a lot of ethnic groups. So of course, it is no news in our history that we also have discrimination issues with tribalism as well. So he also experienced this participant also experienced this issue of discrimination in general form, both within the Nigerian community and also outside the Nigerian community. So participant one also spoke about exploitation in the workplace. And of course, yeah, he spoke about the fact that he works more and is paid less. I think this is not per se a new thing in regards to immigrants. So he spoke a lot about that, spoke a lot about social exclusion and dissatisfaction with the support services in the reception camp. Yeah, like I said, these reception camps that inhabit Nigerian refugees and other refugees as well, they are mainly economically driven because they are paid and they are mostly owned by private organizations. Hence, they are paid to render these services. Of course, they are more profit driven. They are more focused on the numbers, not particularly helping the individual, the refugees. So yeah, they had a lot to say about this as well. So of course, trying to round up their experiences, they also spoke about the fact that, of course, even regardless of what had transpired and their experiences over the years, they've been able to try to, of course, not particularly found like 100% balance, but they've been able to find a way to overcome their challenges over the years. So in discussion, also through the lens of key players, like I said in the initial part of my research, I'm going to also look at the lens of key players to actually get testimonies on the experiences of Nigerian migrants and Nigerian refugees, and if this actually helps, if non-formal education actually helps them. And of course, the two interviews based on the key players, actually, they spoke about the fact that it's actually helpful, of course, that they would benefit more having collaborations and connections within other organizations, you understand? So they just more spoke about the fact that it would be good to collaborate with other organizations, because some organization offers this, some offers that, but it would be good for them to have like an interconnected network whereby maybe if they have access to a particular refugee, they could have other interconnected organizations that can maybe cumulatively help a particular person. So yeah, so they spoke a lot about that, but they also emphasized the fact that, of course, that this non-formal education that they provide has actually been of great help to them based on the two testimonies. Yeah. So in conclusion, to sum up my research, yeah, the experiences of refugees in Italy underscore the requirement for comprehensive policy and inclusive programs designed to assist their integration and empowerment. Yeah, informal educational efforts play a role in tackling challenges. Yeah, like I said, it is, of course, education of any kind is transformative for anyone. And particularly, it's also transformative for Nigerian refugees in Italy, because like I said, this really, in the diverse forms that it comes, even regardless of, in regards to the language learning, in regards to the skills acquisition, like they spoke about, yes, this has been of great help. And the participant also spoke about the fact that it will be also very important to broaden the non-formal educational activities that are being provided. It will be very important to broaden it and also to make it accessible for them, because some of them also spoke about the fact that it is not all of them are accessible to them, you understand? But they also spoke about the fact that it will be very important for them to have access to diverse kinds. And this, the interconnectedness with the key players actually makes a lot of sense here, because when there's a lot of interconnected networks coming together, organizations having access to this, having access to others as an organization, it will really help to provide quality help to a particular refugee. So yeah, I think in conclusion, this is all it is, and this is some of the key references that were really of great help to this particular presentation. Thank you so much. Yeah, this is it. Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Oh, sorry, I was muted. Are there questions from participants who are connected online? If there are no questions from participants who are connected online, I see that Maxim Filatov has a question again.
Hello, Augusta. Thank you for your interesting presentation.
Thank you.
I'm just curious. Do you know the? I read about migration from Nigeria, waves of migration and all that. I'm wondering what's like average amount of people, of refugees who leave Nigeria per year, like an average, like how many people from Nigeria move to European countries, not specifically Italy, but to European countries in general per year. I know, for example, for my country, for Ukraine, I mean, during the war, of course, migration was huge, and roughly saying 7,600,000 Ukrainians left the country for past 2 years, and 95% of these people, they moved to European Union countries.
Yeah.
But before the war, we also had kind of stable migration rate due to economic instabilities and conflict in Donbass. Starting 2014, roughly saying 250 to 160,000 Ukrainians will live in the country permanently.
Yeah.
So what about Nigeria?
Okay, yeah. In Nigeria, mostly around the age of 18 to 35, it's around 70% of yes. But as of the last data that was provided was in 2022, and they had 1.9 million people leaving Nigeria to other countries abroad. So
every year.
The last data was 2022, so I can't really say for 2023 or 2024, but the last data was 2022, and it was like 1.9 million, which is actually our population is around 222 million people. So that is actually not a small portion, but yes, it's in comparison to 1.9 million to 222 million people. But I think, yeah, it's quite a number of people as well. I mean, regardless, yeah.
Little bit less than 1%, 0.9% per year.
Yes, yes.
You count from total population, yes.
Yes, yes, yes. Yes, thank you for the question. Very enlightening.
Are there more questions to Augusta? If there are no more questions to Augusta, I would like to remind participants, I'm sorry. I would like to remind participants who have just connected online that we started the conference an hour later because of misunderstandings between time difference. So the whole program is shifted, and we will need to adapt to these shifts. For those participants who are present in Corinth, I would like to suggest that we work without coffee break. And coffee break is served just there. And when you want something, you can just go and take what you choose. And now we continue according to our program. The next presentation is by Sandra Penic with a very important topic widely discussed now. The presentation title is Blocking Peace at the Checkpoint, How the Geography of Military Occupation Affects Palestinian Psychological Well-Being and Political Attitudes. I think I made Sandra co-host, and she should be able to share the screen.
Here it is.
Yes.
Do you all see it and can hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Let me just make this. So thanks a lot for the invitation to present this work. As you are probably all aware, since October, Israel has killed over 36,000 Palestinians in Gaza. The devastation is such that International Criminal Court for Justice has ruled that there is a plausible case of genocide. Perhaps particularly relevant for us, it's important to acknowledge that Israel has systematically destroyed Gaza's education sector. Not a single student in the Gaza Strip will graduate this year. And Israel has not only damaged or destroyed every university and over 350 schools in Gaza, but it has also killed thousands of students, hundreds of teachers, and at least 100 university professors, including deans and leading scholars. For the remaining of my talk, however, I will not talk about Gaza, but rather about the West Bank, where there is no Hamas. It is ruled by the Palestinian Authority, and focus on a period of relative peace. I will show you findings from 2017, so period where there was no large violent confrontations that tend to be mass mediatized and covered by media, which I hope will bring attention to systematic oppression that exists in this area. So the research I'm presenting has been prepared in collaboration between social psychologists, myself, my absolver from Birzeit University, and John Dixon, and two political scientists from Switzerland, Ravi Bavnani and Karsten Donay. Not sure how much you are familiar with the context, so just very shortly to say that Israel occupies militarily East Jerusalem, West Bank, and Gaza since 1967. The military occupation is illegal according to international law. Palestinians living in those territories have no say over the politics of Israel. They can't participate in political life, yet Israel controls their lives in many ways. It controls immigration, the population registry, planning and land policies, water, communication infrastructure, import and export, and military control over land, sea, and airspace. So Amnesty sums up that this affects when and how Palestinians can travel to work or school, go abroad, visit their relatives, earn a living, attend a protest, access their farmland, or even access electricity or a clean water supply. The military occupation is not just a status quo, but it involves systematic territorial dispossession and expulsion of Palestinians through Israeli settlement building, which is also illegal according to international law. And this settlement activity is rapidly expanding. There are about 600,000 Israeli settlers currently in over 280 settlements in the West Bank, a 200 increase since the start of the Oslo peace process. So all of this exposes to Palestinians to systematic human rights violations that now all major human rights organizations, international as well as Israeli, describe as apartheid. I will focus more specifically on the built environment of military occupation, by which I mean the large-scale, physical, overtly visible infrastructure such as the separation barrier, checkpoints, and military installations that is placed all over the territory of the West Bank and East Jerusalem, frequently in proximity or even within residential areas, with the goal of controlling the Palestinian movements and therefore enforcing the segregation and repression. And more specifically, I will focus on checkpoints, because they play such a central and symbolic role in the Palestinian society, as they symbolize the conditions of occupation. And in 2017, when we conducted our study, there were about 140 checkpoints across the West Bank and over 700 road obstacles. They are mapped on the right. So you can see that these checkpoints are not only positioned on the border with Israel, which is shown in a green line. They are all around the West Bank, and they affect only Palestinians. So they're on the roads that are used by Palestinians. There is a separate system of road for settlers who live in proximity. I just want to make a point of how these checkpoints are close to residential areas and frequently within the residential area of Palestinians. So this is an example from a checkpoint inside Hebron. Hebron has several settlements inside its territory and several checkpoints, including its historic center. So here is an example of one such checkpoint. So if you want to go to school, to work, visit your neighbor or a relative, you need to pass a militarized checkpoint on a daily basis. Checkpoints are justified by Israeli forces as non-violent means of preventing Palestinian acts of terrorism, although independent sources claim that and show typically that these are not their only nor the main goal, but rather that they exist there to support territorial expansion, specifically by protecting settlements. And indeed, studies have shown that rather than being efficient in preventing Palestinian violence, these structures are more likely to fuel support for violent actions and decrease support for peaceful and cooperative actions by fueling grievances at the individual and collective level. Initially, I have thought to present you some of these findings. That's why the political attitudes in the title, but I have decided not to because of the limited time. But instead, I want to take an issue with this second part of an assumption that these are non-violent means. It is sometimes presented like checkpoints are a little bit like an airport. They're unpleasant and they take time, but in principle they are non-violent. And this is then what justifies their existence. And so I want to problematize this with empirical findings. Specifically, I will show you the findings that address the question of how does residing in the proximity of checkpoints affect Palestinian psychological well-being and what are the underlying mechanisms. Now, there are good reasons to expect that residing in proximity of checkpoints may undermine well-being. We know from other studies that in areas where checkpoints are, there is a decreased economic activity, decreased access to health services, all which has important implications for psychological well-being. We also know that these structures decrease social cohesion in nearby communities, social trust, but also, and this I want to develop in more detail, they are likely to expose local residents to violence, to humiliation, frustration, and dehumanization that we know is very harmful for psychological well-being. As a particular mechanism that I want to explore further, because I'm a social psychologist, and so this is quite typical for us, is the role of intergroup contact. And in social psychology, intergroup contact theory and hypothesis is probably one of the most renowned theories that we apply very often, and focus in this research is typically on positive intergroup contact, how positive experiences of contact across the group lines can have important implications for intergroup relations, typically reducing prejudice, promoting inclusion and tolerance. But it has been emphasized recently that we have tended to focus on positive contact, whereas frequently there are also experiences of negative negative intergroup contact. And some recent studies suggest that these experiences of negative contact can have more important impact on intergroup relations than positive contact experiences. And so I want to apply the same logic by focusing on negative contact and its role for psychological well-being, basically assuming that living in proximity to checkpoints increases the frequency of contact with Israeli soldiers. And we know from previous studies that this contact is typically experienced as very negative, as humiliating, and as dehumanizing. So here is just one example of one Palestinian that describes experience of humiliation. So he says the point of checkpoints is humiliation. It is to harden your life, to make your life hell. Humiliation can be as simple as being made to stand just looking, knowing nothing about when you will be released. You are not under arrest, but they can do whatever they want. They can forbid you from smoking or from talking to your friend next to you. You have to hold things on your shoulder, waiting for gates to be open in the sun or sometimes in the rain. This is humiliation. And all of this can be avoided. It just takes a second to check in the computer to see if someone can pass or not pass. But instead, they stop people for 2 or 3 hours for nothing, and then after they are completely tired, they let them go. Now, studies have demonstrated that contact matters not only at the individual level, like in terms of direct contact with the outgroup, but also at the context level. So if you live in a community where there is a lot of positive contact between the minorities and the majorities, even if you personally do not have contact with minorities, you will be more likely to be more tolerant and less prejudiced. And then we apply the same logic here by looking at these contextual communal effects of negative contact, assuming that even if you do not have frequent contact with the soldiers, if you decide, okay, I will never move, I'll just be in my street, I don't want to pass the checkpoint. But the fact that you live in a community that is close to these checkpoints means that many people around you have contact with soldiers, and that already can have an impact on psychological well-being. So basically, this is the model that we test. We examine how residing in proximity to checkpoints affects psychological well-being. And then secondly, we look whether it can be explained by the prevalence of contact with soldiers, both at the individual level, so frequency of direct contact with soldiers of individuals, but also the prevalence of direct contact with soldiers in the local communities in these multi-level models. At the individual level, we use a survey data that we have conducted in 2017 on a representative sample of adult population in East Jerusalem and West Bank. And we have applied geographically stratified sampling design with 49 local communities to be able to run these multi-level models. And surveys were conducted by local researchers and professional local survey agency. To operationalize the proximity to checkpoints, we have geocoded information on all checkpoints in this area, and then we have computed indicators for all Palestinian communities. We have computed 2 indicators. One is simple proximity to checkpoints, what is the closest distance to any checkpoint from every community. And the second, we have used the measure of density of checkpoints within a specific radius. For example, 10 kilometers from a center of the community, we count how many checkpoints are there. And the findings that I will show you are with this indicator of density, but they're similar for the indicator of proximity. There is just more variability with density because Palestinian communities are so close to the checkpoints. Indeed, on average, there are only 3 kilometers away from a checkpoint, and they have more than 6 checkpoints within a 10-kilometer radius. So what do we find is first that the closer people live, or the more their community is affected by the checkpoints, the more likely they are to be exposed to physical direct violence. The more likely they are to experience humiliation, direct or indirect. The more likely they are to be in a state of fear and insecurity, to report the more often they fear about themselves and their family. The more likely they are to have impaired mental health, with a contextualized measure of psychological well-being developed by Brian Barber and Rita Giacomozzi specifically for the occupied Palestinian territory, with measures such as items such as the how often you feel that your spirit or morale is broken or destroyed, that your ambitions and hopes for the future are destroyed, and that you are emotionally, psychologically exhausted. We also use a measure of depression from the outcome questionnaire. And for this measure, we don't find a significant effect. So I would be curious for your suggestions. Why might that be the case? My hunch is that the measure is not really so relevant locally. For example, I feel blue, or I feel lonely, or I feel stressed at work, school, may not be the most relevant measures of mental health in this setting. But as I say, would be curious to hear your thoughts. Okay, and then the second part, we look at the role of contact with soldiers. So basically what we find, as expected, that more a community is affected by checkpoints, the more contact with soldiers there is in the community. At the individual level, the more frequent contact Palestinians have with soldiers, the more likely they are exposed to violence. But then additionally, living in communities with high aggregate prevalence of contact explains additionally this exposure to violence over and above the impact of direct contact with soldiers. We find the same for humiliation, same for fear and insecurity, and same for a measure of mental health, of being psychologically broken. So again, there is a contextual effect of contact. So even people who do not have frequent direct contact with soldiers, if they live in a community that is close to the checkpoints, where people around them have very frequent contact with soldiers, will be more likely to report a lower, being worse off psychologically. And this is important because the prevalence of contact, this negative contact, is pretty striking. So this is a representative sample, and we have asked participants to rate frequency of contact with Israelis in various settings, positive and negative. And as you can see from this table, by far the most prevalent form of contact that Palestinians have with Israelis is with Israeli soldiers at checkpoints, where almost 90% of people have experienced it at least rarely, and almost 40% of participants say experience it often or always. Compare this with contact in more positive settings, like in leisure time or in your neighborhood or at the market, where more than 60% of respondents say they have never experienced it. And so if you compare also directly contact with soldiers and civilians, you can see a similar pattern, where more than 90% of people have experienced contact with soldiers during their lifetime, whereas when it comes to contact with civilians, more than half of participants have never in their whole life met an Israeli civilian. This is how segregation is severe. These are correlational findings, but we have performed a number of additional robustness checks to rule out alternative causal explanation. One is, for example, residential self-selection bias. That would mean that people who are psychologically better off, for example, people who who have more money and more means, move away from these areas, and so that would explain our findings. But we have an information on the residential trajectories, and so we control for this, and we perform analysis also only on people who never moved, and we replicate all the findings. Another explanation could be that there is a confounding role of the past violence, so that the communities where there was a lot of fighting and violence before were subsequently locations where the checkpoints were built, and are also then the places with a lower psychological well-being. But we control for past violence, and all the findings hold. We have also control for a number of alternative communal level variables listed here that I can discuss in more detail if you're interested. Okay, to quickly summarize, so what we find is that closer people live to the checkpoints, the worse off they are psychologically, and that these effects are partially explained by the negative contact with soldiers, which is the most common type of intergroup contact. And these negative effects are driven by both direct contact with soldiers, but also indirect contextual contact, the prevalence of negative contact around people in their local communities. So I hope this convinced you that rather than being a non-violent means of preventions of Palestinian violence, these are oppressive structures. And there are, as I have mentioned, a number of other studies, including our own, showing that they are likely to incite support for violence. I don't present those findings here because of the limited time. And then the point I would like to make is that therefore much of these studies so far have focused precisely on whether they're effective or not, these structures, but the impact on local population much broader, right, than that, and comes at a high social cost. So it affects psychological well-being and not just their violent actions, and importantly, affects entire communities and not just directly exposed individuals. So even if you try to avoid checkpoints and never move and stay at home, you will still be affected by it if you live in a community that is close to these structures. So that is all. Thank you for your attention and your questions.
Sandra, thank you a lot for your presentation. It was very interesting, and I'm sure that unfortunately, in future, it can be relevant also, the results of your research can be relevant also for other countries. I would like to remain politically correct here and don't develop this way of my thinking too much, but we don't know how the war in Ukraine will develop. We can't predict it. We hope for better, but for now we have occupied territories. And I would like to take privilege of my role of moderator and ask the first question. It is obvious that context theory is very applicable in this context, but I'm curious if social identity theory can be also somehow implemented in your research. I doubt, because I have never been to Palestine, even I have never been to Israel, and I understand that in some contexts, theories which are very applicable in Europe are not applicable in that region, especially in such conditions.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yes, of course, I think that social identity theory applies very much in many different ways. One way, obviously, through which it works, that these structures have also a role for identity. They are they have an extremely high symbolic value. So I think they are shaping what it means to be a Palestinian, and also an understanding of the Israelis very much. I also think that there are processes of resilience, like the previous speaker has mentioned, right, of collective identity that plays a role. So there are these negative effects that we document, but I want to emphasize that Palestinians, as other war affected or discrimination affected people around the world, are not just passive victims. There are many ways in which they cope with these experiences, and frequently these are collective ways based on a social identity, based on collective identity. So in many of these communities that are close to the separation barrier or checkpoints and so on, there is an active resistance and mutual support and so on, which I think helps offset some of these experiences.
Thank you, Sandra. Are there more questions from participants online?
I have a question. Ask you to reflect a bit. When we go back to the contact theory in Alport original, he had all these conditions applied to it, like he had to be standing, etc. And I think after this kind of forgot about these conditions. Now I think in your case, particularly if you reflect on how it affects the indirect contact, I've never thought about it, but maybe you have some thoughts about it. Do we have these conditions also for indirect contact, or is it, yeah? One more thing, you mentioned the segregation, whether that plays, how that interacts with everything. Yes, thank you.
Oh, absolutely. I think that we have tended to forget about these conditions in social psychology, especially, but also in other contexts, and have optimistically assumed that positive contact works regardless of conditions. Some meta-analysis even claim that carefully. And there has been a lot of research, more in Israel than in the West Bank, with Palestinians trying to, this classic social psychological, let's create a nice, positive circumstances where we will bring people together to talk about positive things and bond and develop friendships and so on. Since the Oslo, there has been an explosion in this, but the conclusion is overwhelmingly negative, that it does very little. And this is because broader structural conditions in which people live. So if Palestinian from the West Bank will participate in such an activity, he first needs to get permit from Israel, then needs to pass the separation barrier, multiple checkpoints on the way. So what it means, right, for these positive encounters to happen, if you need to go through these specific structural conditions. And this is exactly what I think we are trying to highlight with our research, are these structural conditions. And when we think about the contact, we need to first inquire what kind of contact there is, how it relates to the locations where people live, assuming that yes, positive contact experiences can be powerful and important, but there are contexts in which they are simply irrelevant, right? They don't exist like here now. This is of course not, even in the case of Palestine, before Oslo, during the first Intifada, before the separation barrier and so on, there was more contact. So if you talk with people from older generations, there will be some memories of more positive contact, but in the current circumstances, it's just so infrequent that it matters very little. So theoretically, yes, I think we need to think much more about the role of conditions, especially outwards conditions of the institutions and institutional, and the role of authorities and support, which rarely we do. And here it's basically a conditions of institutionalized segregation.
Thank you. Are there more questions?
I would like to make a quick question as well. First of all, thank you for your presentation. I think it was a very interesting and complex research you have presented us. The mere fact that the Israelis are living within the Palestinian territory can be perceived by the Palestinians as a source of violence because of the representation that they will have of them as foreigners with power and, sort of imposing their way of thinking and social politics in their environment. But I was curious to ask about, how did you gather the data about the psychological aspects? Because I mean, if they feel threatened in any way, like they could in somehow backlash at us if we are presenting ourselves as somebody that disliked their presence. They could be afraid to reveal the truth. And this data could also show by, I don't know, the pursuit for mental health services and professionals. So I think that the psychological well-being could be observed by many aspects and data sources. Which one was used on the research? I think that was a very important aspect for me on the research.
Mm-hmm. So all the data at the individual level is based on a survey, public opinion survey, that was conducted in collaboration with Palestinian scholars. So a group of researchers from the Barszcz University, led by Maya Albzor, who is a co-author on the paper, who has largely developed a questionnaire that we have also pre-tested and so on. And then the survey was conducted by the local survey agency, by the trained interviewers across the entire territory. So it was all done in Arabic by Palestinians. It wasn't done by anyone from abroad. And I agree with you that in these circumstances, it is absolutely crucial to collaborate with local researchers for ethical reasons. Obviously, what we ask, how we ask, we really need a local perspective. For theoretical reasons, to know what to ask and what is meaningful. You can see this striking difference when we used a measure of mental health that has been developed by local researchers for the local setting, and then we use this standard measure or well-being that is used, across the world, and we find different findings. It's just not equally meaningful and relevant. So yeah, I think the crucial aspect is indeed to collaborate with the local researchers, and that they lead the process to do it properly.
Thank you. Indeed, that was a crucial aspect that you have observed on the research. I think that made it much more rich. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions from online audience or from those researchers who are here in Corinth? If there are no more questions, thank you, Sandra, a lot for your presentation and replies to questions. And skipping a coffee break in the program, I would like to start our next session, which is devoted to healthcare inequalities in the context of migration. And the first presentation in this session is by Stylianos Ioannis Tzagkarakis. And the presentation title is Healthcare Inequalities and Social Inequalities in Europe. I need to make you co-host now.
Thank you.
You should be able to share your screen.
Yes, just a second. I hope that you can see my screen now.
Yes.
Okay, my presentation, along with Stamatina Douki from the University of West Attica, is about healthcare inequities as social inequalities in Europe and abroad, actually. First of all, to begin with, according to the World Health Organization, health is defined as the state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Health is a fundamental human right, and every person, regardless of race, religion, socioeconomic status, and political beliefs, has the right to have the highest possible level of health services. According to several scholars, health is also a social good, possessing the characteristics of public goods, and it is not competitive, offered collectively rather than in groups, and provided indiscriminately to all citizens without exclusion. The absence of differences resulting from social stratification ensure equality in health, while the existence of justice, ethics, and values in the provision of health services ensures parity and the avoidance of health inequalities. However, human societies are characterized by the presence of inequalities stemming from social stratification. Inequalities in health and care provision are similarly observed and result from the differentiation of citizens according to their socioeconomic characteristics, known as sometimes social determinants of health. While in the context of all these theoretical issues, we try to explore the social inequalities in the field of health through the review and synthesis of contemporary secondary data. First of all, we can say that social inequalities of health are classified into 4 major groups. You can see more here. We can categorize it into 4 categories: the social, economic, and environmental, which is the family, wider social network, education, work, disposable income, the factors of the immediate environment, food, housing, work, behavioral factors, for example, lifestyle, smoking, diet, exercise, and individual biological factors such as gender, age, religion. According to the findings of the international literature review, and individuals or populations groups' health is determined 40 to 50% by the behavior, 20-30% by social and economic situation, 10-20% by the provision of health services. Actually, there are several data which shows that the theory of social inequalities in health actually can be observed here, that there are specific social inequalities which have been also shown during the pandemic. I will show you some specific data. A research actually from the British Ministry of Labour's stated that mortality in the age groups 15 to 64 was twice as high in the weaker socioeconomic classes compared to the stronger ones. And particularly, well, there are 5 social classes here. For example, the freelancers, the middle professionals, the trade non-manual professionals, the trained manual professionals, and partially trained and untrained manual workers. Men were classified by their occupational status, women by their husbands, children by their fathers, and retirees by their previous occupation. And of course, in research in European countries, it was shown that the weaker social strata, in addition to higher mortality, also showed that a worse level of health in comparison to the high socioeconomic strata exists. And in the Western European countries, the probability of disease increases 1.5 to 2.5 times, and the lower socioeconomic classes in comparison with the higher ones. According to other data, health disparities and exposure to risk factors were positively associated with vulnerable groups such as elderly, children, not in education, young people not in education, employment and training, people with chronic diseases, female, sex, a low economic income, etc. And other studies have shown that individuals who did not complete secondary education have a life expectancy that is 6 years shorter. Additionally, individuals belonging to weaker socioeconomic groups, such as those experiencing poverty, immigration, or belonging to national minorities, often face discrimination and inequalities in accessing health services, including limited access to preventive screening services and specialized medical care. However, health inequalities have been found to vary across countries. In countries with greater social cohesion, inequalities are reduced. For example, Sweden shows reduced health inequalities in contrast to Britain with regard to the index of infant mortality, while health inequalities increase when classified by occupation and work and decrease when classified by income. If we want to see the data on the period of the pandemic, we can see that precarious economies of the developing countries suffered severe economic blows from the restrictive measures, such as government's attempt to curb the spread of COVID-19. So we can see here that there is a contrast between European countries and other countries which face enormous social problems. But also we can see that there are differences here also in the European countries. Excuse me, here there are in Greek, but there are the European countries, and if you see, there is the Social Justice Index from the Bertelsmann Stiftung data and the vaccination. So when we have higher vaccination is in the countries that have highest social justice index. Also, we know that some countries such as Portugal, Latvia, Spain, and Estonia exhibit increased or moderate correlation between income and health inequalities, while in others there is not a strong interdependence, such as Austria, Ireland, and Slovenia. The likelihood of low-income individuals visiting a general practitioner is 5% lower compared to affluent citizens, while the corresponding difference for specialist doctors amount to 12%. In total, 6% of the low-income population has not received timely health care, compared to only 2% of the highest social classes. Of course, geographical distance poses a significant obstacle, particularly for individuals with low incomes or residing in rural areas, with the EU average being 4%, while some countries show no income-related differences. In Italy, access, for example, issues are more pronounced in urban areas than in rural ones. Social inequalities due to geographical distance may exhibit either a proportional relationship to income or a negative correlation. This trend is observed in countries such as Romania, Bulgaria, Greece, Lithuania, Sweden, Austria, the Netherlands, France, Latvia, Luxembourg, Denmark and Czech Republic, Spain, Hungary, Germany, Malta, Finland, Poland, Estonia, Slovenia, Portugal, and Italy. Conversely, some countries show no significant differentiation in this regard, such as Cyprus, Slovakia, and Ireland. The greatest inequality due to income is observed in dental care, with rates of 7% for the highest and 23% for the lowest social groups. In comparison, for medical care, the respective rates are 4% and 13%, and the prescription drugs 3% and 13%. Additionally, unmet dental needs are associated with educational level, with the most significant difference observed in Portugal, where the rates are 17.7% and 4.4% for the lowest and the highest educational levels, respectively. Health is the most important social good and must be provided universally, as an extensive diversion between privileged and unprivileged groups leads to exclusion of economically weaker citizens. Clearly, social inequalities in the field of health are a major problem that needs to be addressed effectively. Health policies and measures to manage the phenomenon worldwide seem to be insufficient and ineffective, especially in countries with weaker welfare states and national health systems. We can see this also in the European level. The planning and integration of innovative actions in the field of public health and drawing up of human-centered health policies will significantly contribute to reducing the phenomenon and improve the quality of the provided services. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your presentation, Stylianos. Could you stop sharing your screen?
Yes.
Are there questions from participants who are connected online?
Maybe I can ask a question. You ended with the very generic conclusions, but what concretely should we do? Like the change in policy, what kind of, because it just, calls for policy change, but it's a bit, yeah.
Well, what we can observe is that in countries, in European countries, if we focus on Europe, in European countries with lowest, let's say, percentages of social justice, then we have highest percentages of inequalities towards the accession on healthcare. So there is a problem there on the accession of in healthcare, especially for the lowest socioeconomic groups. So what should be done is measures in order to increase their access. For example, there are countries in this group of countries that I'm referring on. There are countries in which there are these out-of-pocket payments, which are individual payments, that could be avoided by the public sector, but are not avoided because, for example, the long waiting lists, they are forced, some people, they're forced to go to the private sector, and they diminish actually their income because they have to pay a lot of money there. So whereas there is the public good, for some people it doesn't exist. And of course, there are other people waiting for this. And also, this may decrease their level of health, well, their health status. What should be done is that especially for the lower socioeconomic groups, more policies which will increase their access. For example, health inequalities in terms of geographical also issues exist in Greece, in the islands, which are actually in a very, difficult geographical place. So what should be done is telemedicine, for example. These are actually some interventions in the public health domain, which should be done in order to to decrease the social inequalities which exist. If not, then this will increase in the future, depending also on the issue that in European countries we have populations which are older and older, so they need more services, they need more access to these services. If you don't have them, the inequalities will increase, because people who have money will pay for the private medical healthcare, and the others, and the inequality will increase.
Thank you. Any other questions? Are there questions from participants who are here? If not, I proceed to the next presentation by Barszcz, HIV, Immigration and Stigma, Unveiling Intertwined Axis of Oppression Through an Intersectional Approach. I will make you co-host now. So you should be able to share your screen.
Can you guys see the presentation?
Yes.
Actually, the title has suffered a change since the one that I've put on the first version. So I believe that we didn't have the time to make the update, but because this is a thing that I'm going in a recent turning of events in my PhD. I'm from Brazil. My name is Marcos, as you've presented me. I've studied 6 months also in the Sapienza University of Rome, but my PhD is in the Federal University of Santa Catarina. I already research HIV and intersectionality, but it has just come to my attention to reflect on immigration issues as well. So this is mostly a theoretical reflection from discussions I have been building along this theme, but hopefully it could be of benefit for us to think about this phenomenon. So revealing intertwined the axis of oppression towards an intersectional analysis of immigrants living with HIV. Let me just take away this here because it's in the front. Okay. So, well, it is no news for us that migratory flows are ever-growing issue nowadays, and they demand political and social actions, and this will be related to the possibilities within each territory. So we have seen in other presentations that we need to focus on local aspects, not only on the scientific building of knowledge, but also on the social and political action, so we can constitute different forms of answer to this phenomenon. And we can also observe, I work within the social representations theory as well, that immigration is a phenomenon that has different representations, right? So we can find representations where we observe immigration and immigrants from a human rights perspective as an opportunity for individual, cultural, and social development. Well, given the fact that immigrants can contribute to local economies as well as providing financial support for their families and territories. But we can also observe discourses and representations where immigrants are portrayed as threats, like the production of otherness, which is a phenomenon that has been studied in social representations theory since its beginning by Moscovici, also Denise Jodelet, and has been researched ever since in HIV. Most specifically, Helen Joffé has an interesting and classic study about that. So the production of otherness is also a phenomenon that is interesting for us here. And in these discourses, we can observe that sometimes immigrants are portrayed as threats, that they occupy jobs that would be from the locals. They portray them as no respect for local cultures, or even that they could have criminal implications. We have seen that in the speeches of Donald Trump, as this study I have mentioned over there. But we also noticed that a lot over here in Brazil, in Jair Bolsonaro's speeches, where he has this representations of immigrants that corresponds a lot to the second aspect I have presented. Well, if we go to think as in a global sense, immigration is like has a big statistical relevance with 281 million international migrants on a global scale nowadays. And when you think about displaced people from ranges that will range from armed conflicts, political or ethnical religious persecution, economic crisis, climate changes, there were about 117 million in 2022. So we need to drive attention to a lot of issues, and I believe that the last presentations have also presented this aspect. And the last one most specifically correlates to mine when we think about the health aspects. I have mostly two interests at this point, as I said, a field that I'm starting to think about just recently, is to consider that HIV is also a specific social risk or discrimination conditions for immigrants, because it has been historically associated with stigma, and this has also been notedly reported in social sciences. In Brazil, it has been researched a lot, but I believe we can also find studies abroad, as in Europe, as I mentioned prior to this slide. And secondly, to reflect on immigrants living with HIV from an intersectional perspective, because they will occupy a double social marker for oppression. And like, from being an immigrant, you can, as I mentioned, receive discrimination, social representation, but living with HIV puts you in that place as well. And when you think about these two conditions put together, my reflection from this intersectional point of view is that this product can cause a form of discrimination that is stronger than when you think about these things in an isolated aspect. And when you think that that correlates also to other social markers as gender, race, or social class, we have complex phenomena to think in order to reveal some kinds of oppression experiences that does not appear if you don't think in an intersectional perspective. This is the most important aspect in intersectional research from my point of view. It has been already disclosed in Kimberly Crenshaw classic study, where she discovered that Black women had suffered a specific form of discrimination within the United States of America, the job market. So the point is this, to unveil forms of oppression that are not specifically noticed if you don't think within an intersectional point of view. So this means to examine how a given set of different characteristics articulate themselves to potentialize the structural effects of oppression due to racial, gender, social class, capacity, age, among other social markers. And this will, as I mentioned, come from the perspective that these phenomena cannot be fully understood when you think about them isolated from one another, but rather they operate in an intertwined way. So my objectives were to discuss how immigrants living with HIV can experience specific forms of discrimination and stigma in an intersectional approach, to present a bit of a global data concerning immigration and people living with HIV specifically, and to support the thesis that people living with HIV under immigration contexts often experience different forms of oppression that remain invisible. When I mean these objectives over here, these are ongoing objectives that I intend to move on forward from this point on, not only with this research, but from future investigations. So what are my results? When we look about the global data in HIV, it's interesting to notice that even though treatment has advanced quite significantly, we already know nowadays that if a person living with HIV is within let me just mute this here, is within a position where its serological status is undetectable, the virus is untransmittable. So this is very important for preventing and reducing HIV levels on local and global scales. Also, we have different forms of prevention from the pre-exposition and post-exposition prophylaxis treatment. But even though this strategies has advanced quite significantly, we also observe that in a lot of places in the world and in specific groups, the data has shown that they are growing. So in 2022, an estimated 1.3 million people were infected with HIV, and we have approximately 39 million people living with this condition worldwide. Of this, 29.8, it's we can think that this is about what a big amount of this statistical population, but still far from a number that could erase HIV from being an epidemic condition. UNITES consider that this is an epidemic up until nowadays. Regions such as Eastern Europe, Central Asia, Middle East, and North Africa have witnessed an increase in annual rates of new infection. So what I found is that several countries worldwide have different traveling restrictions for people living with HIV. With this, and this can be a rather politically dangerous choice in many ways, as this can further contribute for stigmatized representations of immigrants and people living with HIV, contributing to exclusion and xenophobia, but also to restrict them from receiving health treatments, from prevention policies. So the fact that these restrictions on traveling inflict on immigration, they have an implication on both immigration and on HIV. According to UNITES, 203 countries do not have any restrictions related to entry, stay, or residency based on HIV serological status, but 48 of them have. Among these, 18 have some form of restrictions, such as Cuba, Israel, Paraguay, and New Zealand, and 11 of them will forbid short or long-term stay. When I mentioned this 18 have some form of restriction, they can demand specific documentation for you to stay, for you to have permanency of the country, or for you to acquire the legal documents you need to find a job or to rent a place to live. So these are forms of restriction that already present some difficulties, but 11 of them will forbid short or long-term stay based on HIV serological status, including Dominican Republic, Tunisia, Ukraine, and Indonesia. And finally, 19 countries not only forbid stay, but they will also deport foreigners based on HIV serological status. And this will include Syria.
I'm sorry. We still see your second slide. Maybe you...
What? I'm sorry. I have been passing them, but for some reason, can you see them switching now?
Yes, now we see.
When I put the full screen, mode, it stays focused on the first, but I guess. Okay, I guess I will not put on the full screen mode, and we'll keep them this way, so it will flow faster. And finally, 19 countries do not only forbid, but they also will deport foreigners based on HIV serological status. And this will include Syria, Egypt, Iraq, Russia, Yemen, and Jordan, among others. So the discussion will think about, even though we have the epidemic of the virus, we must think about, and some authors like Parker and Eggleton will reflect on this matter, we have an epidemic of stigma on HIV, and this is also a fact that reflects on societies nowadays. It continues to have profound impacts on individuals, and this has different levels of interest in social psychology because can affect their interpersonal and intimate relationships, self-image, identity, social recognition, and as well as it remains related to stigma. So we have a wide array of topics that correlate to HIV that represents interests to social psychology. Social markers such as race, ethnicity, gender, social class have also specific effects on these groups and on health policies, as we have seen in the last presentation, intersecting different axes of oppression. So this intersectional phenomena will affect different aspects of their lives, will reflect on multiple axes of oppression and discrimination, different forms of violence for different groups, different access to healthcare services and limitations, as well as their social recognition and treatment, often resulting in experience of violence, oppression, exclusion, and social invisibility. And the social invisibility aspect is an important one when we consider an intersectional approach. So there are studies who have already addressed living with HIV from an intersectional perspective, but while they focus on a wide array of dimensions and topics, there are very few that will think about HIV and migration within an intersectional perspective. So this was one of the findings of my current status of this investigation. There's not much literature about HIV and migration within an intersectional point of view. We will find migration within an intersectional point of view. We will find HIV within an intersectional point of view, but thinking about this, things correlated is still something that I think needs to be addressed further. Also observing the specificities of each territory, because they will have different health policies, different gender violence policies, different racial violence policies, and so on and so forth. So this cannot be think in a global universalized manner, but must address the specific conditions of each territory. To investigate any social issue from an intersectional point of view is to address experiences that often remain invisible due to this complexity, because you're thinking about a qualitative aspect, also could be thinking in a quantitative matter, of course, but right now I'm thinking in a qualitative matter, while this poses a challenge not only for scientific investigation, but also for recognition in the public sphere, because often people are recognized by one category alone, but when you think that they intersect, we can think that there are some implicit forms of violence working along explicit forms of violence. And this is what intersectionality can bring forth. Such issues must then be addressed regarding different dimensions, given the fact that intertwined axes of oppression operate on structural, cultural, disciplinary, and interpersonal domains of power. So this gives us some ways of thinking about directions that research can look upon. A structural approach, a cultural approach, disciplinary approach, remaining like legislation and so on, and also the interpersonal relationship level. And this can help not only revealing power relations in social dynamics, because I'm interested in thinking on a critical approach, but also excluding policies and stigmatizing discourses on social communication, but also for the development of social, health, educational, and health policies on global and local scale, because this is the question, right? This was the question rightfully posed on the last work, and I think it applies here as well. Like, what can we do on a not so generalized matter? UNITE is quite unanimous and quite puts quite an emphasis on addressing the idea that inequalities are the most important challenge in facing HIV nowadays. So we must think about ways of promoting health policies that will be focused on the possibilities of in each territory. Like in Brazil, we have the SUS, or Sistema Único de Saúde. It's a unified health system that is generalized for the country, and it has free access. All medication in HIV is free in Brazil. So, but this will not be true in different territories. So we must think in local and global strategies, respecting democracies, and of course, because we don't want to think about in a colonizing way, but inequalities must be an important focus on developing answers to tackling not only HIV, but immigration in intersectional point of view. So, as to conclude this theoretical reflections, I mean, of course, I have a few empirical data coming from these reports, but this is, I know this is half-baked. It's something that it's being built, as I mentioned, but both HIV and immigration serve as social markers that, despite their extensive historical presence, continue to fuel discrimination and exclusion. So this dimension is also important when you think about this phenomena. Sorry, living under these circumstances becomes even more complex when these markers intersect with race, ethnicity, gender, social class, and when you think that global and local responses to these issues must strive for more concrete guarantees of human rights to these populations, encompassing these different dimensions of structural, cultural, relational, educational, and political aspects concerning health, security, human rights, and also facing stigma and exclusion. Therefore, I believe that the social sciences can play a crucial role in shedding light in these invisible dynamics, as long as we tend to focus on them in this complex aspect that is focused on an intersectional perspective. Here I have some of my references, not all of them, but most of the most important ones. And here are the reports that have given me the data for the presentation. Thank you so much. I will stop sharing my screen right now.
Thank you, Marcos, for your presentation.
Thank you. I'm just...
Are there
okay,
questions from participants who are connected online?
I have a clarification question. You mentioned HIV and deportations. To what extent is that a legal possibility, and to what extent is that a reality that these deportations are actually executed?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question? I did not understand. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so you mentioned that in some countries you can basically be deported if you have HIV. Is that just a legal possibility, or is that something that's actually being done and executed?
Well, I don't have specific data to present about that right now, but I do. We do have some information that this has been happening in some countries, as the ones I have mentioned in the presentation, because this is a legal aspect, but not always this serological aspect is identified, because when people immigrate to these countries and they have the serological aspect, they will try to hide it. So this can go invisible and therefore this is not always perceived. So it's hard to encompass data on whether this happens or not. But this is something that I also need to address further on this matter.
Thank you. Are there more questions? Are there questions from participants who are here in audience? If not, I would like to proceed to our next presentation, Political and Health Crisis, the science of the actions of Brazilian health ministers during the COVID-19 pandemic. Presentation will be done by Marielle Messari Vitali.
Yes, I am.
I need to make you co-host.
Yes.
First. Now you should be able to share your screen.
Yes, just a sec. Let me see. Can you see my full screen presentation?
Yes.
Perfect. So it's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm Marielle Messari Vitali. I'm a PhD student in psychology at UFSC Brazil and in social representations, culture and communication at Sapienza, Italy. I will present for you today a part of my thesis research titled Political and Health Crisis, the Science for the Actions of Brazilian Health Ministers during the COVID-19 pandemic. So beginning with the introduction of this research, in Brazil, the COVID-19 became associated with a context of social vulnerabilities and the political and informational polarization experienced in recent years. When facing the COVID-19 pandemic, political leaders needed to make decisions to control the spread of the virus. Among the recurrent measures are the expansion of frontline workforce and the provision of material security conditions and infrastructure to healthcare professionals. Within the governmental structure of the country, Brazil, the Ministry of Health is responsible for organizing and developing public policies aimed at promoting, preventing, and providing healthcare to Brazilians, thus being essential during a pandemic crisis. However, the country had 4 different health ministers during a 1-year period, mainly due to the defense of scientific arguments in combating the pandemic. These positions of these ministries were contrary to the stance of then President Jair Bolsonaro, who discouraged virus precautions and promoted the use of hydroxychloroquine even after other countries suspended its use. So we understand that during a pandemic, the scientific denialism serves specific interests and is this is a difficult word for me, sorry, and is characterized by discrediting science for political, economic, or other purpose. So as highlighted by Gower and Gaskell, the social representations theory is the theory basis for my thesis research, elucidates the intricate interactions between common sense and science, delineating how common sense dynamics serve as a source of scientific knowledge. Moreover, arguments about science involve the reality experienced and the identity and social context of the speaker. Due to governmental failures in tackling the pandemic in Brazil, a parliamentary inquiry commission, as we call in Brazil CPI, began on June 30, 2021, to investigate omissions and irresponsibilities that result in more than 700,000 deaths from the virus in the country. Approximately 50 people involved in combating the pandemic were heard in the CPI. Among them were the 4 health ministers who held the positions, namely Luiz Henrique Mandetta, an orthopedic surgeon, minister before the virus arrived in Brazil, and who remained in the ministry for only 1 month after the WHO World Health Organization declared a pandemic. After we had Nelson Teich, an oncologist, minister for 1 month also, from April to May 2020. After we had Eduardo Pazuello, an army general who remained in office for 10 months, from May 2020 to March 2021. And in the end, we have Marcelo Queiroga, a cardiologist who assumed and remained in office from March 2021 onwards. So the present study, as I said, is grounded in social representations theory, articulated with discourse studies by Van Dijk and identity studies by Fanny and Heischer. In this case, social representations arise at the intersections between individuals and society, mediating the relationship with objectives, themes, and activities, resulting in an idea that is circulated socially. Van Dijk considers that discourses related to social structures associated with context express the speaker's position. Additionally, the general topics of a discourse are organized to present an argument about the theme. This argumentation seeks to make the audience favorable to what is being said. We associate this argumentative aspect with identity, considering that arguments used in discourses construct social reality around themes and strengthen group identity. However, discourse can also polarize information and create antagonism between different groups. Therefore, the present study aims to identify which arguments about science were present in the discourses of health ministers during the CPI and understand how the arguments about science used by the ministers are associated with identity aspects. So the method that we use for this research is a qualitative and documentary study conducted with transcripts of the meetings of the CPI, which were broadcast by the Brazilian Senate, and also transcribed and made available on the government's website by them. For this research, the hearings related to each minister were selected, and the initial 15 minutes of discourses made available to the interviewee, and the subsequent moment where the reporter asks prepared questions without a pre-established time limit were analyzed with critical discourse analysis. Initially, the transcripts were read, and the relevant passages for the study's objective were selected using the following criterion: the passages that have science as the basis of the argument, explicitly or, sorry, I heard a sound. So the criteria was the passages that have science as the basis of the argument, explicitly or implicitly. Then, to achieve a critical understanding of the discourses, we analyzed the arguments used, the language strategies employed to present them, and how they are associated with the speaker's identity aspects. So about the results, I will present to you the context, the science, the arguments, and the language strategies and identity. So about the context, when analyzing discourses, it is understood that the context in which they are delivered is relevant. Therefore, the context as CPI, a Parliamentary Inquiry Commission, implies the investigation of those responsible for the mismanagement of the pandemic, considering that a viral pandemic implies a health and sanitary emergency. Brazilian health ministers were called. It is known that discourses in the political spheres tend to be associated with persuasion, as they seek to influence opinions and beliefs on certain subjects. The co-presence of diverse arguments about science, the use of certain rhetorical resources to emphasize or diminish their relevance, and the discursive strategies aimed to a persuasive communication were identified in these hearings and in them discourses. About the science, in the hearings analyzed in this study, science is represented either as an ongoing process or as a shared truth. Debates often point out the essences of groups with reference to professional category. In the case of these people, medical or military category, the political positioning also from these people, right, center-right, or unspecified, and ideological positioning is still working in progress, this part. About the arguments used in their discourses, Mandetta and Taish, both doctors, arguments presented science as a process, an investigation involving knowledge. However, they disagree on scientific knowledge about the COVID-19 virus. Mandetta, this first one, pointing out there is a scientific evidence about the functioning of viruses, and Taish indicating the absence of information about it. Pazuello, the Army General, and Queiroga, the other doctor, mainly represent science as a final truth that has to be achieved through consensus among institutions. Interestingly, in their discourses, contradictory instances are present, which implicitly or explicitly undermine the clarity of scientific process about COVID-19 and raise a suspicion about information that have been circulating socially and mediatically. About the rhetorical resources used and identity, Mandetta and Taish use technical language. They present their actions as based on scientific arguments and position themselves as scientific experts, for example, eye doctor, and they're in group as civil servants with ministry. Science is used to differentiate from or depreciate the others, for example, Bolsonaro, the government, because they are science denying. Pazuello and Queiroga alternate vague and detailed language and gerrymandering, which spark a debate in the committee. What it means they not speak clearly about the subjects. Pazuello positions himself as I Pazuello and we Brazil, associating himself with the people as opposed to vaccine developing institutions, opposed to government sectors, states, municipalities, and other countries. Personal characteristics or group belonging are used to differentiate groups and not scientific evidence. Remembering that he is an armed general, not doctor. And in the end, Queiroga was listened 2 times in 2 different hearings because they discovered that he lied about important themes at the first one. So Queiroga positions himself as a mediator of the conflict between opposing scientific views. First, at the first hearing, he distances the ministry from science, even stating that the ministers follow legislation rather than scientific societies. After, in the second hearing, he positioning himself as I-science, yet preserving the status of mediator who facilitated the process of reaching a scientific consensus among different voices. So I brought some preliminary conclusions because my thesis is still a work in progress. The present study identified that arguments about science are varied. Science is used to persuade the committee and the public that actions and decisions were well positioned, thereby removing the individual responsibility for any mismanagement. The authority of science in itself is not explicitly put into question. However, different representations and different discourses about science were presented by the ministers. Overall, results help to reflect on how, in a moment of health crisis, an epistemic and political crisis permeate different governmental spheres in Brazil, intensifying the vulnerability experienced by the Brazilian people, resulting in the number of deaths due to the virus and the initiation of a CPI to investigate those responsible. Here is the reference that I use for this part of the work, the research, and thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Marielle, for your presentation. Are there questions from participants who are connected online? Maybe there are questions from those who are here in Corinth.
I think Home One opened the audio here online.
Pardon?
Mari, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, please.
I found very interesting your research, and I was thinking, we as Brazilians, we experience all that, and this movement that was made about anti-science, and here in my family, a lot of people didn't want to take the vaccine, and so much people died because of that. And until these days, people are taking this medicine like chloroquine, and that causes various problems like liver failure. And I was thinking, you are in Rome right now, and you spend the time in France before that. And if you experience these movements of anti-science and something similar of what we saw here in Brazil.
Originally, my thesis research is a comparative study Brazil and France, because we identified some connections between both. But my preliminary results show that the scientific denialism is stronger in Brazil than France, for example, because the political measures in France are based on scientific studies, while in Brazil we have this political spheres that is opposed to the scientific contents. So in Italy, I'm not sure, because I didn't make a deeply study, but I can tell you about this difference between France and Brazil, because it is a very significant difference. But in Brazil, it was the strongest.
Yeah, thank you. I was thinking about what you said, and Marcos said something like that before, about how Jair Bolsonaro is here to Brazil as Donald Trump is for United States, and the fanatism, political fanatism that is so much bigger than science and medicine. And thank you.
Yes, it is a totally populist discourse. It's very similar. Thank you for the question.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? If not, I suggest to finalize this part of our meeting. As we started 1 hour later, we are going to have lunch now, and we will meet in an hour. In Central European time, here in Greece, it will be 1:30. 2:30, sorry. I also confused time. Sorry, we meet in an hour at 2:30. And in Central European time, it will be 1:30. I hope that our last part of our last part of our conference will be without more technical issues and misunderstandings between time and confusions, and it will be focused on education in the context of migration. We are going to have several very interesting presentations. And I hope that most of those participants who are connected now will be also able to connect after lunch. You can stay here. We will keep this Zoom open. We will just start in an hour. See you after lunch.